Alright, stop! Before you hit that dislike button, let me explain a couple things. First, I'm MangaKamen. Hi, nice to meet you. I'll be the person you'll be hating for the next couple minutes.
It's history's greatest monster!
And this is Temtem, a game that recently released on Steam as early access or alpha. And if you've been on YouTube for about 20 seconds, you'll see plenty of people are praising the game outright and how it's better than Pokemon, or how it's a comparator to Pokemon. Even outright lying about some of the aspects about Pokemon, and showing that they're complete idiots on the subject. Like, I'll happily admit that I'm biased with Pokemon. Hell, if you're watching this right now, you're probably seeing me draw a Pokemon right now.
Thanks, Captain Obvious.
But I'm not blind to its issues, as demonstrated by my multiple videos on the subject. So, despite what people may think, I'm not a shill for Pokemon. However, Temtem, there's a few things that make me hesitant to want to touch this game. And I'll say it right now, I haven't had a full experience playing the game. I've played a little bit of it, but due to some issues, I haven't been able to play it outright fully.
What's wrong? Don't you want to be inside me?
And there are some issues with how I was able to play, but I'll get to that later. So here are my issues with Temtem, and note, some of these things will be very subjective, and if you disagree with me on that, that's perfectly fine. In fact, I want to hear your disagreements, but just try to be civil. That's all I ask. So, let's get this out of the way. The opening day for Temtem just plain sucked. Seriously, you can't deny that it's an issue that people had stuck in waiting for ages just to play the game.
Are you crazy?
And even when you did get in, some people got immediately kicked out. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not expecting perfection from a game on its opening day, especially one that's an MMO. Well, I guess. Even though there are 3 stress tests for the game, and apparently there wasn't any foresight to account for all the people showing up, especially when the game developers only apparently planned for about 20k people for opening day. Whoops. But hey, that kind of stuff happens with MMOs. But really, this ties into the big issue for me, and that's the game is online only. Don't get me wrong, I understand it's advertised as an MMO, even though from what I've seen, there's no real way to actually interact with people in the game, but it's a monster collector that's based off of Pokemon, and yes, it's based off of Pokemon, even the developers themselves have said that. Even if they censor the word Pokemon in a Discord server, it's obvious where this game gets its inspiration from. Not only did the long await times and excessive kicks kill any sort of enthusiasm I had going into this game for me, but it also doesn't help that there are reports of people losing their progress after being kicked. If it's not possible to play the MMO portion, it should at least be some other sort of single player experience. Especially considering how it's gone so heavy with the player base and how the structure of the game can easily be set to a single player experience as well. I mean, looking at the routes and looking at the map, it's very linear in that regard. However, you can't do that. Like, the idea should have at least been considered for an offline mode. That way you could have people enjoy the game, get a taste of it, but not be worried about these issues. The other issue I have in regard is that this is an alpha. For those who don't understand game terminology, it's an early build of the game, and don't get me wrong, it's understandable to get ideas out there, and to get a player base set up before you go full on extreme release. However, there's an issue with that. Like, the advertisement for the game made it seem like it was a finished product, and clearly it's not. Throw in the fact I'd have to shell out $35 to play the alpha and run the risk of not being able to get the game because the developers didn't account for this is an issue right off the bat. Maybe if the alpha was cheaper, I'd be fine with it, but $35 is a bit steep asking price, especially considering the mess of the game that it was when it first went live.
Let me in! Let me in!
I personally don't think that's acceptable, but hey, to each their own. And like I said, I get it, it's an alpha. Trust me, I understand. But that doesn't mean I should be expected to pay $35 for a game where I can't actually play it. I'd actually suggest that people wait before shelling out $35, at least until the issues are fixed up here. Or at least until the hype goes down a little bit. But hey, what do I know?
You're crazy!
You know, the one thing I really don't like is how Temtem has that platypus fake mon in the thumbnail of their animated trailer video. Like, I get it, people like the design and want it for Pokemon, but please, you're really milking it a little bit too much for me. But that leads to another issue that I have with Temtem, and that's with the design work. Like, the platypus looks good, but it just stands out like a sore thumb with the rest of the creatures. You can easily tell it was a Pokemon because for some reason the design team didn't bother to actually modify the design when they brought it in to fit with the rest of the monsters. Not that it's an easy job since most of the monsters just look plain weird. Hell, Playpet to the platypus looks good because it's a simple design and very clear in what's supposed to be. Same with the mascot of the game. Well, I say mascot, it's the Temtem that the team decided to be worth making plushies out of, and it's essentially just a flying pig. Simple and effective. But then you get things like Sparzy, which... I don't even know what I'm looking at here. I get it's electric, but... Ugh, that face! Ah, get away from me! And Ragnet, and I apologize if I'm not saying these right, looks just as bad to me. Like, I know they're going for a magnet theme, but it just ends with the head and it's just plopped onto a muscular body that skipped leg day. The designs of the monsters seem to be both over-designed and under-designed at the same time, and I know that's a criticism that can be levied at Pokemon, but for the most part, the designs like Garbodor, Vanilluxe, and Klefki at least know what they look like and what they're trying to convey. Not to mention, they do still fit the general aesthetic of Pokemon. And the designs of the human characters are just really unappealing to me. Like, the best I could describe is that they remind me of characters of Breath of the Wild, but they just look lifeless to me in that regard. I'd even say the monsters look generic, perhaps that's my bias speaking, but hey, and they actually look very alien in contrast with the rest of the world and the humans. At least with Pokemon, you can see there's a cohesive art style going on with both the creatures and the humans going here. So here it is when I have to restate that my own experience with the game is limited, so if anyone wants to call me out on this, go right ahead and I'll gladly admit I'm wrong. But the mechanics here in the game are things I just don't like. Like, I understand that there's a lot of carbon copy here with Pokemon, and at the same time, that's good and bad, but frankly, it's just a mixed up on that regard right there to me. But there are a few things I don't really care for, like the first being the stamina system, which is akin to something like an MP or TP bar that you see in bog standard RPGs. In order to use any move in Temtem, you have to expend a certain amount of stamina in order to use the move. If you run out, you have to rest and recover your stamina, and in addition, if you try to use a move and run out of stamina, you take damage based on how much you take past your limit. At least that's what I understand. Now, normally this is a fine thing, but my issue is that you're forced to wait. We couldn't have like a standard attack like while weak can still be used. Think like a basic attack from Persona or Final Fantasy, how it makes some more neutral moves like kick or tackle be 1 or 2 points of stamina. That way those larger moves would be much more expensive to use, but you'd still have an option in order to get your attacks in and you're not forced to just basically wait. I just think losing a turn is just a little bit too much, and to take damage is a bit much as well. I know that the counter is that you have to be more manageable with your stamina effectively, but I'd argue that getting damaged is a bit too much. I think it's a bit too much of a punishment, especially when you have a pool of stamina is already limited in that regard. If anything, if you run out of stamina or you don't have enough stamina to use the moves, that you should just be locked out of them, and be forced to have your Temtem rest, or use a much lower Temtem skill in order to do it. Speaking of, I think the battles lasted a little too long. One of the things I noticed that a lot of health pools are a bit too thick. While I'm not too keen on Pokemon having the one-shot opponents, which I think is a bit of a gross generalization, I don't want to be stuck battling the same creatures again and again for a long period of time. At least I want there to be, actual strategy going on, like the creatures have like moves that actually prevent me from one-hit KOing them. Buffing up their HP doesn't really, matter to me. It doesn't make the game fun, it just draws it out a bit more for me. And that's not really something I consider to be fun. There's also the breeding mechanic, and oh boy, this is something I really do not like. You see, the biggest issue is that your Temtem can become infertile. Like, what? So there's a restriction on breeding your Temtem. I really don't like that kind of restriction, especially since it can affect Temtem that you may just want to breed down, and that just makes it like, ugh. Also, this is a small thing and not really a mechanic, but something I wanted to complain about since I couldn't find a place to talk about it better for it. I don't like how you're basically forced into a loss with your first Temtem battle against your rival. Even if you choose Temtem that resists his Temtem's moves, you'll still lose. And I think that kind of misses the point of like your rival battle. Basically, if I can go back to Pokemon, the reason why they go with the standard fire, grass, and water, it's to basically showcase how the typing system works. And it's supposed to show like your weaknesses and your strengths and what you can use. It basically is a good way to get into it. However, with Temtem, I don't get that same vibe, especially with the fact they go with Mental, Melee, and Crystal. Like, let's just be blunt here. Mental and Melee are basically psychic and fighting, respectively. And it's like mind over matter. Okay, I get it, but how does Crystal affect this? Why does Crystal fall into this thing, and why is it good against Temtem? It doesn't make a lot of logical sense, and I understand it's something that people have been wanting in Pokemon at the same time, but it still has to have some logical sense. Fire, grass, and water were basically the same thing, and they actually made a lot of sense. Heck, you could probably do the same thing with water, ground, and electric, and you'd still have the same effect because it's so simple on how to do that. Electricity doesn't conduct through ground, gets washed away by water, and electricity basically surges through water, and you can have that same effect go right there. But back to this, I understand the reason why they want you to make you lose against your rival. I'm not a fan of having forced losses, especially in a game like this, but I understand why, but I still say it's flawed. Again, going to Pokemon, let's take Blue for example. You didn't need to lose to him in order to dislike him. You hated him because he was a jackass. He was always one step ahead of you, and he told you to smell him later all the bloody time. What a dirk. And I'm gonna point this out since at the time of scripting this, I forgot to talk about this in mechanics, but I really do not like the idea of removing RNG in battles. Stuff like missing attacks or critical hits are really something that I don't like seeing removed. Don't get me wrong, I'm not for them, but at least it makes the battles a little bit more unpredictable and not as calculated. I know that the competitive scene in Pokemon has been trying to cut down on this, but I really don't like it, because it comes off as the game can be solved. Like, eventually there will be objectively better builds and guides on how to breed these monsters, and it'll become extremely formulaic and really cut down on the roster on what you can and can't use. I know the same things happen with Pokemon, but at the same time, when you cut out, like, RNG, you cut out a whole bunch of other moves and abilities and things you can use.
I ain't touching that.
So, I'm gonna come out and say it. Don't buy Temtem. At least not in this current state. That's not me saying it's a bad game. In fact, I think it can be a really good game despite my issues with the mechanics and gameplay. I think it can be a good game. But it's an early access MMO that you can only play online for $35. And from what I've heard, there are going to be microtransactions in the game. Something I'm not really interested with that. That isn't me saying don't buy the game at all. I'm just saying wait for the game's hype to die down, wait for the servers to be updated, or have more servers than just one, and wait till the game is way more polished than it is right now so that way you don't experience crashes. Now, it's possible that the price would go up if they added more to the game, but to that I'd still wait to see what reviews are, and don't just look at the positive reviews. And do me a favor and try to ignore people who are backers in that regard. You've got people who are willing to spend $6,000 on this game in the Kickstarter, so they kind of got a bit of a horse in this race to justify pricing that much of a drop. Also, these people are complaining about the ability to choose your gender in the games. Please just shut up. It's just a harmless choice in the game. It doesn't push an agenda, and please stop trying to make this political. It's not. It's just a choice that doesn't hurt you. Seriously, I never understood why people like to bring this up. Damn you, quartering! But hey, that's just me. What are your thoughts on this? Let me know in the comments down below. I don't think it's the Pokemon killer. Why? Because I've heard this so many times. Digimon, Spectrobes, Yokai Watch. And now for Temtem. I frankly am getting sick and tired of people bullshitting like this, especially on YouTube. And I'm tired of seeing it be thrown onto my computer screen whenever I log in on YouTube. And it's just getting sickening for me to even watch this, and it's just like, oh my god. Throw in the fact that I don't think it'll actually be a compare for Pokemon, because for one thing, it's an indie game. It doesn't have the exact same formula going on, but people are saying that, oh, it'll be a good competitor for Pokemon, and I'm like thinking, no, it won't. It doesn't have the same cultural impact as Pokemon, and probably never will. Despite what people may think, I don't agree with it. And I'm really getting tired of YouTubers peddling this dumb stuff. And I won't sugarcoat it. Temtem looks like it'll be a good game, but it's got a long way to go before it's actually a good game. Anyway, I'm MangaKamen, and remember to examine your fandom. Thanks for watching.